The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a jar of water. Follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make the preparations for us there." The disciples then went off, entered the city, and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. While they were eating, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take it. This is my body." Then he took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which will be shed for many. Amen, I say to you, I shall not drink again the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." Then, after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I've always appreciated watching young people's relationship with Band-Aids, especially the toddler age. Once we discover this miraculous thing called a Band-Aid, it seems that there's at least a period of time where every little bump and scratch prompts a crying out to mom and dad, "I need a Band-Aid. Please, I need a Band-Aid." I don't know if it's just that their favorite characters are on the Band-Aid, but perhaps it reveals something deeper, that at a foundational level, we all recognize the vital importance of blood and keeping our blood. Right? And sometimes we need much more than a Band-Aid. Much more than a Band-Aid solution. In my early 20s, I was struck with a sudden illness that led to rapid internal bleeding. I didn't know what was happening. I felt myself getting very cold, feeling empty, losing energy rapidly, feeling helpless, totally helpless. Fortunately, I was still living at home, and my father was there, and I remember desperately crying out to my dad, "I don't know what's going on, but I know I need help, and I know I need it now." And so I have a lasting memory of my father seeing me and hearing me, and then calling for help, and then rushing to my side, where I remember vividly his prayers, asking our Blessed Mother and asking Jesus for intercession and to be there. And then he rode with me in the ambulance to the hospital. The vital necessity of blood. And even though it's vitally necessary, how easily we could take it for granted when we're feeling healthy, but then how immediately desperate we can be for it when injury strikes. Blood. Our reading from Exodus reminds us that blood has so long been recognized as vital to life that it has been instrumental in making public commitments. And so Moses' sprinkling of blood on the altar of sacrifice and on the people is sealing their commitment to a covenant which has mutual obligations, mutual responsibilities. They're basically pledging their lifeblood to each other. That's a good context for understanding Jesus' words that foretell his sacrifice today. This is my blood of the covenant. Jesus is giving us his pledge of God's life to us, and as a covenant, it requires the complete pledge of our lives to God in return. His words reveal his sacrifice. My blood, which will be shed, which will be poured out for many. And he offers to us the cup. The cup of salvation from today's psalm, the cup of his suffering and death. That cup which he had prayed might be removed from him, but not his will, but rather the Father's will be done. That same cup by which Jesus laid down his life on his own, no one took it from him. Hebrews tells us today that Jesus, as high priest, entered once for all into the sanctuary, not with the blood of goats and calves and bulls, but with his own blood, and obtained for us eternal redemption. Jesus becomes mediator of a new covenant, and there's that word again, mutual responsibilities. Jesus offers the pledge of God's life to us and invites us to pledge our lives to God in return. And perhaps that's a renewed way to look at the offering of the gifts at every Mass. It's not just simply a couple people carrying bread and wine. It is the body gathered, presenting our lives to God, asking that they be blessed and transformed. And in return, do we recognize him? Do we recognize Jesus as he comes to us in the Eucharist? Do we? Perhaps you do. Perhaps you have been blessed with the eyes of faith. Perhaps you're already in a routine, a beautiful routine, caught up in faith, receiving Jesus intimately here. Perhaps you have a habit of visiting him in adoration, his real presence, where you reveal to him and you listen to him. And if you are struggling to recognize him in the Eucharist, if you're struggling, I invite you to step back and be aided by the words of St. John Chrysostom, who offers us a contemplation. And he offers us that if we cannot find Christ in the beggar at the door of the church, we will not find him in the chalice. If we cannot recognize Christ in the beggar at the church door, we will not find him in the chalice. A simple, but perhaps complex reflection on social justice. Simple but profound reflection on the reminder that Christ often comes to us in distressing disguise. A reminder that whatsoever we do for the least of our brothers and sisters, we do for Jesus himself. Christ is present in the Eucharist. Christ is present in the beggar at the door of the church. And the beggar at the church door may take on many appearances. Of course, we may immediately think of someone who was without material resource, who comes to the church because they rightly recognize the church as a body devoted to charity. The beggar at the church door may look like someone suffering from a broken relationship. Truly, the beggar at the church door is anyone who is losing their lifeblood, and in that disguise, is Christ yearning to teach us. Anyone who's desperate for help and desperate for reconciliation, someone who's in need of someone to call spiritual 911 for them. You know, when I was taken to the hospital in my early 20s, I was the desperate beggar. I was crying out for help, and my father saw me. My father heard me. My father prayed with me. He accompanied me where I received immediately a life-saving transfusion. Perhaps that's a good way for us to consider what beggars we might encounter at our church door. Those who at a deep level recognize the vital necessity of not only blood, but of the blood of the new covenant, of the blood of Christ. Those who perhaps have fallen prey to taking it for granted because by the world's standards they've been feeling healthy. But those who immediately can become desperate at a given time when injury strikes. Today we thank God, Abba, Father, Daddy, for hearing us, for rushing to our side in the person of Jesus. And as we go forth today from here in Jesus' name, let's ask God for help that we might continue to see him and hear him in all who beg, that we might rush to them, recognize Christ in them, desiring to teach us from where it hurts as we go together to the altar for much more than a Band-Aid solution to what ails us, but that we might hear together Jesus' offer of a transfusion of his life-saving blood offered to us in the cup of salvation.